Welcome to another true crime tale, and for this video we're going to make our way to the Pimlico district of London, where in the closing days of 1887 a Metropolitan police officer was arrested and charged with having carried out a brutal attempt at murder. This is Gerald Road, located in the super posh enclave of Belgravia and just a stone's throw from Buckingham Palace. A little way along it on the left stood Gerald Road Police Station, which opened in 1843 and closed its doors for the last time in 1993. It is remembered by a plaque on the wall of the house that now occupies its site and by one of London's quirkier bollards shaped in the form of a policeman. The original lamp is still visible on the outer wall of the residence, albeit it is no longer blue, the de facto colour of lamps outside police stations since the 1860s, which was meant to distinguish them from military buildings, as well as to let the public know that protection, safety and sanctuary were to be found here in the robust form of the Boys in Blue. However, there have been occasions when individual members of the force have well and truly gone off the rails and have found themselves in the cells of their own stations, some charged with terrible and serious crimes. One such example of this occurred at Gerald Road Police Station on the 29th of December 1887. Now, I must begin by saying that as I researched this tale, I found it to be a truly sad one, because notwithstanding the horrendousness of the act perpetrated by the officer in question, a personal trauma appears to have been the catalyst behind his actions, and the story really does highlight the problem inherent with the famous stiff upper lip attitude, when men as a whole, and the likes of policemen in particular, were expected to carry on regardless, irrespective of whatever personal demons might be tormenting them. Indeed, what becomes apparent as this story unfolds is that the officer's colleagues and superiors had been aware of his mental anguish for several years, and yet any resources that might have helped him overcome them were simply non-existent. So let us travel back in time to the afternoon of Thursday the 29th of December 1887, when at around 12:30 p.m. Constable Benjamin Hewlett, aged 41, of the Metropolitan Police's B Division, walked into Gerald Road Police Station in an excited state and, according to his superior, Inspector William Curtis, looking very wild indeed. "I am going mad! I have killed my boy!" the constable blurted out. Curtis later recalled their subsequent exchange. I exclaimed, "What?" and he repeated the expression, adding that he had killed the child with a chopper. Ordering two constables to take charge of Hewlett, Curtis hurried to the constable's residence at 107 Lumley Buildings in Pimlico, where, on going into the front room, he found 9-year-old Ernest Hewlett sitting on a chair, blood pouring from two very severe wounds on his head, his injuries being tended by Police Constable Henry Felgate, who lived in the adjoining apartment. The inspector sent immediately for the acting divisional surgeon, Dr. Thomas Neville, and whilst awaiting the doctor's arrival, he searched the flat, later stating that, "On a table in an adjoining room used as a kitchen, I found a chopper with wet marks of blood on the blade. There was also a large quantity of blood on the floor of the room in which I found the boy. I likewise found a schoolbook, the Royal Readers, near the fireplace, and the pages were splashed with blood." Dr. Neville later recalled the scene that greeted him on his arrival. The boy was sitting in a chair and was bleeding profusely from a lacerated wound about 3 inches long on the crown of the head. The bone was broken and a second wound was on the temple, a semicircular, incised wound 3 inches in length, extending to the bone which was broken. The child was sensible but very feeble. Having dressed the wounds, the doctor gave orders for Ernest to be taken to St. George's Hospital and then made his way to Gerald Road Police Station to examine Constable Hewlett. He later recollected that Hewlett was very quiet, noting that he had a vacant stare. I conversed with him, but he did not recognize me. I asked him several times who I was, and finally he gave a start and said, "The doctor." He did not seem to understand what was going on. He had not been drinking. Inspector Curtis, having locked the flat up, headed back to the station, where he charged Benjamin Hewlett with feloniously cutting and wounding his son Ernest, later recalling that he seemed dazed when the charge was taken. The next day, Friday the 30th of December, Benjamin Hewlett appeared before Magistrate Mr. William Partridge at Westminster Police Court. The prisoner, who looked ill and had a very vacant expression of countenance, was allowed to be seated in the dock, the Echo reported in that evening's edition. The first witness called was Inspector Curtis, who gave a rundown of the events that had occurred the previous afternoon. Asked by Mr. Partridge how long the accused had been in the police, Curtis replied, 16 years, adding, he has a fair character. About a year and 9 months ago, he lost his wife and was left with 3 children. That seems to have preyed on his mind. Mr. Partridge inquired if Hewlett had been strange in his manner of late. He had been on duty. I can't say that he has been strange, but he has been dejected. He was on duty on Thursday morning. He has not been on the sick list for 12 months. He looks strange now? Asked the magistrate. Yes, he has not his accustomed look, the inspector replied. The next witness was Dr. Thomas Neville, who spoke about the boy's injuries. Since he was also the family's physician, he was asked about Benjamin Hewlett's medical history, and a tragic profile began to emerge. According to the doctor, Benjamin Hewlett had suffered from epileptic fits for several years, and he had last treated him on Christmas Eve. The loss of his wife had affected him deeply, and he had been very despondent since her death. In fact, Neville told the court, I first saw him in fits after his wife's death. I have seen him 3 or 4 times in actual fits since. At the end of that hearing, Hewlett was remanded in custody and was taken to Holloway Prison. Over the course of that weekend, Ernest lay unconscious and in a critical condition at St. George's Hospital, where, according to Lloyd's Weekly newspaper, on Sunday the 1st of January, the house surgeon entertained no hopes of his recovery. With their father in prison, the other 2 children, 7-year-old Lucy and 4-year-old Henry, were, according to Inspector Curtis, entirely dependent on charity. The boy was being cared for by Hewlett's colleagues, whilst Lucy was being looked after by very poor friends in the country. At Holloway Prison, Benjamin was under the supervision of the medical officer, Philip Francis Gilbert, who, over the course of the next month, sent reports to the court concerning his mental state. Delving into Hewlett's history, a picture emerges of him as an able police officer and a devoted family man, whose life to that point had been quite ordinary. He was born in Islington in 1846. He joined the Metropolitan Police in the early 1870s, and although his career wasn't particularly noteworthy, his name did appear several times in the newspapers during the 1870s and the 1880s, and on several occasions he had demonstrated courage and resolve. In September 1873, for example, he was part of a large contingent of constables who were deployed to Parliament Square to contain a baying mob outside Westminster Hall. At one point, the crowd suddenly surged forward, and Hewlett was pushed to the ground, whereupon Michael Flynn, a labourer, stamped on his chest and cried out, "That's the way to serve them!" Flynn was later given a month's hard labour for the assault. On the 14th of December 1875, whilst on duty in Pimlico Road, Hewlett saw 19-year-old John Williams and 2 companions crossing the road, and for some reason he became suspicious of them. He duly followed them, and on seeing him, the 3 separated. Hewlett followed Williams into a house, where he found him trying to put a coat on. He asked him where he had got the coat from, to which Williams replied, "Petticoat Lane." Hewlett told him that he didn't believe him, and taking him into custody, he marched him to Gerald Road Police Station. It transpired that the trio had stolen several coats from a rail just inside the shop of tailor Mr. Bedford Woodsford of Pimlico Road. As a result of Hewlett's diligence, John Williams and William Brown were given 3 months' hard labour. On the 13th of May 1877, at the age of 30, Hewlett had married 22-year-old Julia Mannell at St. George's Church in Bloomsbury, and the couple moved into his lodgings at 81 Lumley Buildings, Pimlico. Julia hailed from Sudbourne in Suffolk. Their first child, Ernest Edward, was born in September 1878, around which time they moved into the larger apartment at number 107 Lumley Buildings. On January the 17th, 1880, a daughter, Lucy, was born, and 4 years later, in January 1884, their second son, Henry, was born. On the 15th of October 1884, Hewlett was on special duty outside the Court Theatre in Chelsea, regulating the traffic in Sloane Square, when cabman Samuel Butler drove towards him at a furious pace. Hewlett held up his hand to caution Butler to stop, but Butler took no notice, shouting back that if he didn't get out of the way, he would drive over him. Hewlett held his ground, whereupon Butler carried out his threat and ran over the constable's left foot, injuring it so severely that the officer was unable to return to duty for more than 2 weeks. Butler was given 2 months' hard labour for the offence. The Echo, in its edition of Saturday, January the 17th, 1885, published details of another case in which Hewlett featured prominently and was again injured. A vicious woman. Annie Isles, 24, well-dressed, described as a prostitute, was charged at Westminster Police Court today with assaulting Constable Benjamin Hewlett. The officer deposed that on Friday afternoon he was called to the prisoner in George Street, Chelsea. In consequence of her gross misbehaviour, he was obliged to take her in custody. She then became very violent, got his left hand in her mouth and bit 2 of his fingers, causing intense pain and a loss of blood. She also made a deliberate attempt to injure him in a very serious manner. After this conduct, she was strapped onto a stretcher for conveyance to the station. The prisoner said that the constable held her to the ground and tried to choke her. Saunders, the assistant jailer, proved several convictions, and Mr. Partridge sentenced her to 3 months' hard labour. On leaving the court, the prisoner exclaimed, "Thank you, that won't hurt me, for I can do it on my head." Little did Mr. Partridge know then that the next time he would see the police officer who had arrested Annie Isles in his court, it would be as the accused, charged with attempting to murder his son. A few months later, Hewlett's wife Julia was taken ill and was treated by Dr. Neville, but her condition worsened, and in June 1885 she died, leaving her bereft husband to balance the pressure of his police career with the difficulties of now being the single parent of 3 children. Anyone who has suffered the loss of a partner will understand the anguish that such a bereavement can cause, and for Constable Hewlett there was probably little to no bereavement leave or counselling available. He would simply have been expected to carry on, and from the court testimonies of Inspector Curtis and Dr. Neville, it is evident that that is exactly what he did, despite signs that he was experiencing severe mental health issues that surfaced soon after the loss of his wife. I also can't help wondering if the injuries he had suffered in the line of duty might have left him with some form of post-traumatic stress disorder, but of course there is no way of knowing whether that was the case now. Either way, despite it being obvious to his colleagues that Hewlett was depressed, he soldiered on, not taking any time off sick, and the attitude to depression at the time is aptly summed up by Inspector Curtis's later court testimony that he was depressed, but I cannot say that I have seen him ill. Throughout January 1888, Benjamin Hewlett was kept under supervision at Holloway Prison, where the prison doctor tried to establish whether or not he was well enough to stand trial. Hewlett made another court appearance on Friday the 6th of January, albeit not a great deal was discussed other than that the prison doctor sent a certificate to the court stating that, although the prisoner was in a low and desponding condition, he had shown no symptoms of actual insanity whilst in prison. Despite earlier concerns that Ernest might not survive, he did in fact respond to treatment, and it was decided that he should testify at his father's next court appearance on Friday the 10th of February. The Morning Advertiser published the following brief report on the proceedings in its next day's edition. Since the 29th of December last, the boy has been an inpatient at St. George's Hospital, and his injuries were so serious that for some time his life was despaired of. The prisoner, although not suspended from duty, has been attended by Dr. Neville, the acting divisional surgeon, for epileptic seizures, and there is no doubt that he was in a very strange and excited condition some days prior to the committal of the offence with which he is charged. The boy, who was brought to the court to give evidence, is still under the care of the hospital doctors, and he deposed that his father, who had been very kind to him, struck him twice with a chopper. He had often seen his father in fits. The defendant was kind to his wife before she died, and since then his conduct had been strange. Mr. Arthur Ward, house surgeon at St. George's Hospital, stated that the wounds inflicted on the boy were dangerous and his recovery was slow. At the close of that day's proceedings, Mr. Partridge committed Hewlett for trial at the Central Criminal Court. Benjamin Hewlett's trial for feloniously wounding Ernest Hewlett with intent to do him grievous bodily harm was held at the Old Bailey on Wednesday the 29th of February. The first witness was Inspector Curtis, who again detailed how events had unfolded on the 29th of December the previous year, before telling the court that, "I have personally known him for 3 years. He was devotedly attached to his wife, who died about June 1885, and since that time he has been depressed, but I cannot say I have seen him ill. He was depressed down to the end of February, when he was remanded. He failed to understand the commonest things that were said to him. I talked to him about his children, and he seemed lost. On more than one occasion he failed to recollect anything about the attack on his son. He was very vacant. The next witness was Dr. Neville, who repeated the evidence he had given at Westminster Police Court about Ernest's injuries and his exchange with Constable Hewlett at the police station on the 29th of December. He too added a little more detail about the effect the loss of his wife had had on the defendant. I attended the prisoner's wife. He was a most devoted husband and was much grieved at her loss. Mental affliction would no doubt aggravate epilepsy. I first saw him in fits after his wife's death. I have seen him 3 or 4 times in actual fits. There are cases of epilepsy where, although not in a fit, they are absolutely unconscious of their acts, and for some time afterwards. I should say that at the time he committed this act, having regard to what I have observed of him, that he did not know the nature of the act he was committing. That is founded really upon the epileptic disease, not permanently insane, but insane at times, so as to not know what he was doing. The final witness that day was Dr. Philip Francis Gilbert, who testified that, "I am the medical officer at Holloway Prison. The prisoner was there from about the 30th of December to the present time, under my care all the time. He has had no epilepsy there, but I have treated him with medicine. From my observation of him, I should say he is epileptic. His appearance certainly carries that out. There is nothing inconsistent with his being perfectly unable at times to appreciate the act he is doing. Epileptic vertigo is a well-known disease to the medical profession. Although they recover consciousness, at the time they may be perfectly oblivious of the act before and after." The judge then summed up, and the jury, having retired to consider their verdict, returned and found him guilty, but not being responsible for the act at the time on account of insanity. The judge therefore ordered him to be detained in an asylum during Her Majesty's pleasure. And thus a truly sad case drew to a close. Although you can't help feeling sorry for Benjamin Hewlett, the trauma for his 3 children of having now effectively lost both parents must have been unbearable, and I really couldn't leave this tale without looking further into what became of them. Lucy was admitted to the City and Metropolitan Police Orphanage in Twickenham, where she was listed as a scholar in the 1891 census. By the time of the 1901 census, in which year she was 21, she had become a servant in the household of Charles and Harriet Oldham in Great Beelings in Suffolk. She married Edward Samuel Page of Springsmith on the 24th of March 1910 at St Anne's Church in Wandsworth. Her brother Henry was one of the witnesses on the marriage certificate, and her father Benjamin's occupation was given as police pensioner. Following his father's trial, Henry went to reside with his maternal grandmother, Emma Mannell, and uncle, James Mannell, in Sudbourne in Suffolk, and is shown as still living with them in the 1891 census. He later moved to Lambeth in South London and became a drayman. He married Lizzie Ethel Blunden in 1904, the date of the wedding coincidentally being the 29th of December, the anniversary of his father's attack on Ernest. On his discharge from St George's Hospital, Ernest also went to live with his grandma and uncle in Sudbourne, but sadly he died there on the 18th of July 1890 at the age of 12. The cause of death was given as phthisis or tuberculosis. Whether this was related to the injuries he received at the hands of his father is difficult to ascertain, but there can be no doubt that they must have played a part. He was buried in the churchyard of All Saints, Sudbourne, on the 23rd of July, 1890. As for Benjamin Hewlett, he was taken back to Holloway Prison following his trial at the Old Bailey, where he remained until the 3rd of March, when the Home Secretary, Henry Matthews, signed a warrant for his removal to Broadmoor Asylum, where he spent the next 37 years. He died at Broadmoor, aged 79, on the 23rd of July, 1925, coincidentally again on the anniversary of the funeral of his son and victim, Ernest. He had been in receipt of a police pension from the date of his admission to Broadmoor, and following his death, probate for his estate, valued at £181, 15 shillings and sixpence, was granted to his daughter, Lucy Page. And thus we close the book on another true crime tale. I hope you found this video interesting, and if you have, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It really does help. I'd be delighted to see your observations in the comments section below, as you may well have spotted something that I've missed. Did you find the story as affecting as I did? Yes, what Benjamin Hewlett did was truly awful and horrific, but at the same time, there was no support network to help him as he began to unravel following the death of his wife Julia in 1885. Perhaps if there had been, his life and those of his 3 children would have turned out very differently. Thanks for watching, and until we meet again in the dark and mysterious labyrinth of Victorian London's true crime underworld, stay safe.